Friday event. We're very happy to start these again. It's been nearly 2 years, and we have some very interesting guests today to tell you lots of stories about growing up in Clarkdale and dating Clarkdale boys and all that kind of good stuff. So I'm going to introduce Barbie Duncan, and she'll introduce the rest of our guests today.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having us. This all got started, several years ago, as you can tell. But in order for us to come here, I was bragging to some of my friends about how all of my siblings, or most of my siblings, we were all from Cottonwood, raised on the river and Verde River, and how we get kind of hooked up with those Clarkdale boys. So I don't know how many of you saw a little piece that I had sent in for your newsletter a year ago. So as a way of introducing today and what we're going to go through and what the program might look like for you, I'm going to read that little article to you, and I think that's probably my mic, sorry. I'm going to read that article to you, and then I'll introduce the Clarkdale boys to you, and then each of them will have a turn at talking about what they did, how they grew up in Clarkdale, and what that was like. And then when we finish that, then we'll have them introduce their families that are here to join us today. And after we do that, then we'll open it up for questions and a little bit of a discussion, because as I look around the room, I see an awful lot of you who I know our paths have crossed, and sometimes we've been together for years. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy your Historical Society program today. Oh, those Clarkdale boys. Growing up in the 60s and 70s in the Verde Valley was an amazing experience, and the adventures memorable. Everyone knew everyone in the surrounding towns. They knew your parents, and all your relatives, and all your neighbors. Whatever happened hit the gossip lines immediately, and most kids knew their parents would learn of their behavior within hours if they did something they probably shouldn't have done in this small community. Perhaps one of the most interesting taboos to me during high school was the commonly understood edict, don't date those Clarkdale boys. We lived in Cottonwood. The Clarkdale boys, and Jerome boys by association, were touted as not being good choices because they only liked sports and music, listening to wild music of that long-haired group from England, and playing every sport imaginable, leaving little time to cultivate a romantic relationship. After all, there wasn't much else to do in this small community for a teenager once the chores and work of the woods was done for the day. The Sedona boys pretty well stayed in their neck of the woods or frequented Flagstaff. No matter, it was too far to travel from here to Sedona anyway, even though $1 worth of gas would get us to Prescott over Mingus Mountain. The Camp Verde boys were also off limits because of their reputation for racing fast cars and fighting, both of which they excelled at greatly. We were reminded often that we only need look in our own little town of Cottonwood to find perfectly suitable dates for high school events and weekend movies. There were 8 girls in our family, and all but one of us ignored that advice. Sister number 7, who's with us today, married a fine young man while she was serving in the Air Force. However, they moved to Clarkdale to live and raise a family, so the brothers-in-law consider him homegrown. As for the other 7 of us girls, we sought out, dated, and each married a Clarkdale boy. 6 of those boys served their country, many during the Vietnam War, then returned to Arizona with some coming back to the Verde Valley and others here and throughout our state and other states. Just in case anyone's wondering how those Clarkdale boys' marriages are working out, well, I'll let them tell you how long some of us have been married. Clarkdale boys weren't the only hot item riding the bus to Mingus and Jerome. We had 3 brothers who also found the love of their life in Clarkdale girls. 2 of them are still married to their sweethearts as well. We lost one brother 9 years ago. Do any of these names sound familiar? Schwab, Carpenter, Wambacher, Duncan, Ayers, Frank Harrell. Homegrown Clarkdale boys with some families go back 3 and 4 generations, and they chose to marry Osborne girls from Cottonwood. So without further ado, this is Howard Schwab, Steve Wambacher, Jim Duncan, Johnny Francaro, and Cliff Ayers was to be with us today, but he had a last-minute doctor's appointment and couldn't be with us. So We will start with Howard, and my mic's still working. We'll start with Howard. And Howard, would you mind sharing with everyone in our audience here a little bit about what life was like in Clarkdale? Thank you.
I gotta stand up.
Stay right where you are. Wherever you're comfortable.
I moved to Clarkdale in 1952. I was 10 years old. I was adopted with 4 other boys by Casey and Millie Schwab. Lived at 1904 First North in uptown Clarkdale for a year or so. We outgrew that house, moved to the corner of Main and 89A across from the park and across from the tennis courts, where the tennis courts used to be. We outgrew that house, it seemed like, and we moved to the Turner House in Lower Clarkdale, behind my dad's Shell bulk plant. Before I even came here, my mom worked in the smelter as a chemist, I understand. And she was the first woman to ever wear shorts at Clarkdale. School, I went 2 years of lower school, 6 to 11 at the high school. Went to Jerome my senior year and graduated from there. As a youngster in Clarkdale, every shop was full on that upper part of Clarkdale. Selden's Market, the bank, Miss Riley's Dry Cleaners, Joe Wambach's newsstand, the barber shop. There was a shop between the barber shop, which I don't remember what it was, and Harris Drug. And then the theater. Upstairs was Dr. Joe Pepperidge's dentist lab. Across the street was Normie Wambacher's Big Ben, Dan's Texaco, who was also a Wambacher, and Mrs. Post, Ma Post's Cafe. The town hall was operated by Perry Moore, and the post office, our box number was box 806. I played Little League. We swam in the Clarkdale pool. When it was closed, we swam in the river. We swam in the river more than we did the pool, though, I think. We were down there all the time on the river, either fishing or swimming. Played Little League, had a paper out, mowed lawns, worked at Selden's Market, sang in the choir at St. Thomas Episcopal Church. Was a Boy Scout, and we hunted a lot. Hunted deer and elk, and I even went hunting buffalo one time. Vince Randall had to drive me because I wasn't old enough. That was quite a trip up there, I'll tell you. I worked for my dad a lot at his bulk plant, unloading oil from train cars. And then when I got a little bit older, I even built a stove oil truck in Jerome, delivered stove oil in Jerome. And that was yeah, I didn't even have a driver's license then. I was too young. 1957, my dad started Casey's Corner in Cornville and operated it until he died. And pretty much everything, that's pretty much does it for me growing up in Clarkdale.
Where did you have buffalo?
Pardon?
Where did you go hunting buffalo?
At the House Rock Ranch Valley and up by on the North Rim.
Did you get one?
Yes.
Steve Wambacher. My parents were Clarence and Norma Wambacher, and I had a brother named Bill. I was born in Tucson. My father was a miner, mostly by trade, and my only real claim to fame was that I was one of the very first babies that was given a blood transfusion due to the Rh factor, which is a protein that is attached to the red blood cells. So that's about my only claim. There was a nurse there that worked in Tucson who came back and lived here in the Verde Valley. I don't remember her last name, but her first name was Fabiana. She worked for a long time in the Marcus J. Lawrence Hospital, which was in downtown Cottonwood, as opposed to where it is now. In the early years, like Howard had mentioned, our family moved. We've lived in 4 or 5 different homes throughout Clarkdale. It was interesting growing up. Where I live now in Lower Clarkdale, it was basically abandoned at that time. As a child, spent many hours in there breaking the windows, BB guns and things like that. But in growing up, it was unique in this town because, as Barbie mentioned, you couldn't do anything without somebody knowing what you had done. And my parents knew it before I got home. So, and looking around in this building, it brings back a lot of old memories. When I went to school, first school was in Lower Clarkdale, in the elementary there, and kind of is where I started my sports endeavors. It was with Bob Duvall, who was the principal at that time down there. He organized quite a few of us younger kids. We're in the 3rd grade, and basically got us playing basketball, and then he would take us to Mingus, and we would play at halftime while the varsity was going through and resting. It was a unique time here in Clarkdale. From there, I went to the junior high across the street, which actually burned down, I think, in the late 70s, early 80s, something like that. And from there, I ended up gravitating to Mingus, which was the first freshman class of Mingus Union High School in Jerome. From there, I went on to NAU and graduated in 1969 as a teacher. Came back and taught at Cottonwood Elementary for 2 years, and then was hired at Mingus to write a new program for a life science program for the freshmen that were coming in because they were needing different opportunities for some of the kids who couldn't pass IPS, which was a tough class for the freshmen at the time. And then I went to NAU and helped write a curriculum for the earth science at Mingus. And then after a long period of time, Mick Ryan, who was a biology teacher, resigned, and I ended up teaching mostly biology for the rest of my career, which was 31 years at Mingus and 2 years at Cottonwood. Growing up was, as I said, very interesting at the time here in Clarkdale. You basically could roam free. I would walk out of my house, which at that time was in 1507 First South Street, pack my 22, walk right out into the gully, which is headed towards the highway there, which is now Mountain Gate, and would hunt quail and rabbits and things like that. Walk up into what is called Josephine Tunnel, which is now the big reservation activity going there with all the new homes and things like that. I used to, I played a lot of baseball with brother-in-laws and stuff like that. With many of the coaches started out with Bob Duvall, then went to Bob Richmond, then a gentleman by the name of O'Brien who ended up coaching the Clarkdale Cubs. We were champions every year that I was a Little Leaguer and every year that I was with the Clarkdale Cubs. A big time was to go to the golf course and play golf. I would meet up with my brother-in-law Jimmy and his brother Wayne at about 8 in the morning, and we'd walk over to the golf course, cross the old bridge, across the Verde River, and play golf until it was dark and come home. Or we would take a strip off and go into the lake and hunt golf balls, which was rather kind of profitable because we'd each get about 1,000 golf balls and sell them to Dr. Bright, which he was very kind in helping us out. So that was a huge part of the time as a youngster. In the mid-50s, I started working with my brother Bill, who was a masonry contractor at that time. And it was one of the first jobs I ever worked on was building the Big Ben, which was a endeavor. My parents were in partnership with Matt and Eva Peckridge, who worked together in forming the Big Ben at that time. My Uncle Dan had the Texaco station. My other Uncle Joe had the newsstand, and my Aunt Virginia was the postmistress here in Clarkdale for 30-some years. My parents had box 1, and we had box 5. And I held that up until 2 years ago because I became too lazy to go to the post office. So I've been in Clarkdale 74 years. The only year that I wasn't here was obviously when I was in actually Dos Cabezas, Arizona, which is a little southeast of Sierra Vista. A lot of activities went on during those times. There probably isn't an area within probably a couple of square miles of Clarkdale that I haven't been in on foot. As Howard mentioned, the dam was a great place to go swimming. I really gravitated to the pool. I couldn't wait to get to the pool. We had a lot of good friends that were here. It seemed like, though, at that time, it rained every afternoon at 1 o'clock. And it was miserable as a kid because there was a clap of thunder with anywhere of hearing, they closed the pool for an hour or so. And it was kind of sad to see that Clarkdale did away with the pool. I know it became very expensive and whatever, but it was a great time growing up here as a kid. You never locked your car, you never locked your house, and parents really, I can remember being out at 8 years old at 10 o'clock at night. Parents do, you said you're going to be there, they trusted you being there, and I'm sure they probably called and let the other people know that when you're tired of them, get them home. I know I spent a lot of dinner times at other people's houses. So, but it was, I will tell you, it was fantastic as a child growing up here. It's been fantastic as an adult living here. It's amazing to see the changes that have taken place. And I hope they all provide opportunities for the youth growing up. I know it'll never be the same as what I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Mr. Duncan, I know this guy.
Hey, thanks for coming. It means a lot to us. We got some knowledge of Clarkdale for sure. I was born in Prescott in '49, and we moved to Clarkdale in 1954. My dad, Joe Duncan, and my mom, Berthy Duncan, and I have two brothers, Marvin and Wayne. My dad was the freight agent for Alabama Freight Lines, and that was in Lower Clarkdale. And he had the lot next to us was empty. There was a dock there where he would store his freight. He got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, every morning, drove to Prescott in a bobtail truck, and got his freight. And he came back home, he sorted it all out, and he was the UPS, Amazon guy in the Verde Valley. If you wanted it, it had to come through him. In fact, in the summer times, We weren't that old, like probably child labor then, but we would ride with him all over Cottonwood, Jerome, Clarkdale, especially Camp Birdie, and we would get in the back of his truck. Usually my next oldest brother, Wayne, and we would know which stop was next. He would just go up and down the alleys in Cottonwood, because all the businesses were open. And we would put the freight in the back of the truck. He would get it on his hand truck and take it in. And we did that, all summer. And we couldn't wait to get to Camp Birdie at Wingfields because we got a cold Pepsi. that was really important to us. My mom was actually the bookkeeper for it, for the company. And let's see, my life here. Like Steve said, we intermingled a lot, and we all played sports together, and we went to the pool. I was more like Steve. I went to the pool every day. We lived in Lower Clarkdale, and we'd walk up and swim just about all day, and we'd walk back home. And on the way, there used to be a little burger shack down just past the Catholic church, and it was called Effie's. And we would stop in there, and my brother always went to play the pinball machine. And I shouldn't tell on him, but he would have his bathing suit rolled up in his towel, and he would go over to the ice cream bin, pull it back, let his towel unroll, and stick 3 ice cream bars in there. And we go home. Growing up down there, we had, I have a lot of pictures here that you're welcome to look at. We had wild donkeys from the mining days that were just wild, and we all rode them. And sometimes it wasn't so good, but other times you could stay on pretty long, and we all had names for all of them. I went to the elementary school in Lower Clarkdale, like Steve, and then attended the junior high. It's no longer there, and then went to Mingus Junior High School. I graduated in 1967. We played golf together. I actually had a golf scholarship for Coach Sheets Junior College down in Douglas. It was a 2-year fully paid. So I went down there and played golf with them for a year, and it was great. We partied a lot, and we played a lot of golf. And when I went back to the second year, I wasn't happy, and the service was raging pretty strong, the Vietnam, and so I decided, you know what, I want to go to service. So I called my dad, told him, he goes, that sounds good. And so I did. I joined the Navy. Spent a couple tours in Vietnam. Came back home. I was actually dating one of her older sisters for a short period of time. And then that's a long story that I don't have time to tell. But we got married in 1972. And we lived in Flagstaff. Barbie was going to NAU. In fact, last Saturday we just celebrated our 50th, which was really nice. That doesn't happen a lot anymore, I don't think. We lived in Flagstaff for 18 years. I went to work for Southern Union Gas. It used to be down here also. And then they became Citizens Utilities, and finally Unisource Gas, which I retired from as an area manager down here in Cottonwood. We moved back, and our folks were getting a little older, so we probably need to help out down here, so we did. And I didn't do that. We have one daughter, Jennifer, who's a nurse in Phoenix. We have one granddaughter, Addison. She just turned 14, and she's in 8th grade at MVP in Packard. I think probably one of my first jobs, other than being a mule for my dad in the back of his truck, was probably at the Verde Valley Country Club. And my dad had, I think, the first old Jeep here in the Verde Valley. And we go fishing and hunting all the time with that. And he played golf with several of his buddies here. There used to be a group at the Verde Valley Country Club called the Clarkdale Foursomes. Well, there was always between 8 and 10 of them played. And if they were out there, they had the course themselves. They did what they wanted to. And there was gophers on the fairways. And so I was hired on to trap gophers. So I'd take my, was probably 14, I'd take my dad's old Jeep around the golf course, which I thought was pretty cool, and trap gophers. And that was probably my first actual job. There's lots of stories, but all of our stories intermingle pretty much because we grew up together. And like Steve said, you couldn't think, I don't think you could find a better place to live in Clarkdale. I live in Cottonwood now, but we're still in Clarkdale quite a bit. Thank you.
All right, thank you. No, tell us about it.
Hi, I'm Johnny Frank Carroll. I've lived here in the Verde Valley for 62 years. My family has been here for 115 years. They actually originated from Spain on a cruise ship and come to New Orleans, and from New Orleans where they ported, they were on to Jerome, where they actually were all working in the mines. My dad they had to stop over in Cuba to give birth to my first uncle, Richard, which many of you probably know is Frank Carroll Lane in Cottonwood, had one of the first slaughterhouses here in the Verde Valley. Then they went on to New Orleans, and then on to Jerome from there. In 1909, my dad was born, and my grandmother and grandfather had 4 more siblings. Millie Rudinger, which a lot of you may know too, that worked at APS for years and years and years. We've been a whole lot of this, part of this community as we've all grown up. We had Charlie Frank Carroll, Jesse Frank, and Frank became a teacher. Jesse had an accident up in Jerome, and Charlie moved to California. My mother came to the Verde Valley from Payton, Oklahoma. In 1941, she was 18 years old. She arrived here with my Aunt Nancy, which was a Newton. Many of you have heard about the Newtons. They've lived here as long as we've lived here. The building, when she came here and arrived with my Aunt Nancy, the building, they started making pies and selling pies. And the building they sold the pies out, everybody probably knows now is the Dairy Queen. It was where they sold pies out of. And that's how she made her living. My dad was drafted into the military, where he never actually went to any kind of boot camp. He hauled all he did was haul ammunition back and forth across the country to supply houses for the military. That's what he was doing. They were married in 1947 at Coconino County Courthouse. Also worked here in town for Larry Brundrick. Rock and Gravel also worked for Ed Starkey, which Steve and Jimmy both talk about, well, Ed Starkey is the one I knew in my years as owning the newsstand. I mean, it's gone through, but everybody knows it as a newsstand. It's never changed in 100 years. And also, he worked at the cement plant also when it first started. He passed away in 1968, and my mom raised 6 of us by herself. And she first started working at the Mingus as a cook and retired from there, and then worked at Bash's and Cottonwood and passed away on the March 7th of 2018. And I met my wife also here in Clarkdale. As a matter of fact, we'd go down to the swimming pool. She was 13 years old, or she was 11, I was 13. And I'd say, come over here and swim with me. And she'd say, no, we're not supposed to be around Clarkdale boys. That has been a long thing all the way through the family history. I'd go up there and help Casey work on cars. Casey and I were real good friends, and I'd help her work on cars, and she'd come out, and Casey said, get out of here, we're busy. He'd run her off all the time. Casey, that's all right, she can stay. She's not bothered. In 1981, went deer hunting with Nancy, and that's when Sheila and I got together. We were married in 1984, the 28th of April, 1984, celebrating 38 years together. I have one son and one daughter-in-law and one grandson, and I'm the baby of 6. And my wife is the baby of 11. And I'd like you to meet my wife, Sheila. And a lot of it growing up around Clarkdale was just like Jimmy and Steve said. There was no boundaries. You could go anywhere you wanted. Yeah. All you had to do was, and I can remember to this day, it only takes 5 minutes to make a phone call. When you wouldn't call them back and tell them what you're doing, you'd get home, they'd be looking at you like, okay. All it takes is a phone call. Doesn't take very well, yeah. But we did do it. We always got in trouble and suffered consequences for it. But there was nothing like being raised here. I myself also went to Lower Clarkdale growing up. The school over here, and it was great. It really was. There's no other place that you could go and do the things we did around here in this town. I wouldn't have traded it for nothing. I left for 4 or 5 years when I graduated from high school, but I came right back. It was just, I've been from here all the way to the East Coast, and there's nowhere like the Valley. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daddy. Okay, Howard, would you please introduce your family and whoever's here with you? Introduce your family and whoever's here.
My wife, Donna. Stand up. We were married 54 years yesterday. And my daughter, Michelle.
Thank you.
My husband's working and my grandson's working too. They couldn't be here.
Thank you, Howard. Steve?
My wife is Kathy Wambacher. We actually met when I was coming back from Germany from the Army when I was discharged. The first 2 people I saw when I came into the airport was Barbie and Kathy. And it was later that we got together and married. We will have our 50th anniversary July 1st. We have a son and a daughter, Michael and Lori, who have grown up to be very fine, upstanding Clarkdale-ites. And they definitely love coming back here. I'd like to digress one quick moment. There was a part of my time here I left out of my speech that was really important. This building has a lot of significance. Vince Randall and I coached here and things. But one of the things that was really great about Clarkdale, when you were an 8th grader, there was a gentleman by the name of Zeke Taylor and another one by the name of Ken Chilton, who put together a horseback ride for all of the 8th graders when they graduated. And we would go to Sycamore Canyon, which was a really important place for Zeke Taylor because that's where Taylor Cabin is. And we would go there and spend a nice time there on horseback and come back. And Mick Ryan and Darwin Ryan, also a teacher at Cottonwood, and Darwin was here before he went to Kingman. It was a great opportunity for our youth to be able to do that. But sorry that I had to digress from that, not taking away from my wife, Kathy. I always do that.
Thank you, Steve. Honey?
Well, as you all know, this is my wife, Barbie. She's pretty well known around the Money Valley area. She worked at Young Pike College for a lot of years. And like I told her, I have one daughter, Jennifer's a nurse in Phoenix, and one granddaughter is just 14 and Mountain View Prep. And I won't digress.
This is my wife, Sheila. I have one son and my daughter-in-law, and they couldn't make it today. We've been married for 30 something. I didn't want to have to get my nose back out.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I would like to ask Mr. Duncan to digress just one moment before we open it up to the floor for questions and ask him to tell you just how it happened that his father's dock came to burn. But before he does that, I'd like to introduce our little sister, Joanna. She lives in Clarkdale, so she's a resident of Clarkdale, but she's the only one who didn't marry a Clarkdale boy. She brought with her today her granddaughter, Carrie, and her grandson, Cohen. Cohen's taking a nap, so she lives in Clarkdale, so she's excited. So, Mr. Duncan, how'd that happen?
How did you remember that?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know, we were probably 12, 13 years old, I guess. And my brother and my mom smoked cigarettes, and we decided that we should try some. So we did, and we thought we were sneaking away, but you know, she knew every time that happened. Well, the dock on my dad's for the company was all completely made of timbers, and the summertime, and he and I would go underneath there and start little fires with pieces of wood, and we'd put them out. Well, we were under there this particular day, and we forgot to put it out. And my mom yelled at us, "Come to eat lunch." And she had a terrific nose. And we're sitting there eating lunch. And she goes, "I smell smoke." And we went. So they look out the dock, and first it's smoldering. And we definitely felt the wrath of that one. You know, back then, it was the belt. It wasn't a finger. And I have to tell myself one other time. We used to go down to the dam to swim, a bunch of us together. And I was still pretty young then. It was a real dry summer day. And was probably that tall, was white. And we went down and we swam. And when we were heading back home, a couple of the older boys had some book matches, and the ones you pull out, tear off. And he said, "Hey, flip one of those down there." I said, "No, it'll catch fire." "No, we'll put it out." So like a dummy, I did. And they put it out pretty quick, but it was pretty hard. "Do another one." So I did. And it took off that time. Nobody put that one out. So we all hauled home, and there was one of the Jackson boys, younger than me, and they lived in Lower Clarkdale also. He went straight home and told my parents what I did. And, so I get home, and my dad says, "The fire department was down there by the dam." I said, "Really?" "Yeah. You didn't happen to start a fire down there?" "It wasn't me." Then he said, "Well, it was Joe that came by and told us." Okay, I did it. So here comes the bill. Don't do that anymore. So I decided I would stop being a firebug about that time.
Sorry to get you in trouble on that. Before we open it up for questions, would any of you boys like to add anything? You want to say anything else? No? Okay. All right, we'll take questions from the floor. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask. Yes, sir.
Yes, I have a question for maybe Howard and Steve. How many times were you stopped by a buck snotty?
I don't know, 4 or 5 anyway, 4 or 5 anyway, I don't know.
Can you tell us who Buck Snotty was?
Oh yeah, he was the marshal. He had a 55 or 56 Merc. Yeah. Andy Peterson and I were racing through Clarkdale one time. He was in his dad's Chevy and I was in my dad's Ford. We went up the hill and he went around that way and I went straight, and Buck Snotty was parked at the corner of the park. I think he was asleep because I don't know whether he saw us call. He knew we went by. And I pulled up the highway and I just stopped and he went shoo on by, and pretty soon he comes back and I was still there. He says, "It's a good thing you stopped." And I said, "You didn't even see me."
Buck Snotty knew a lot of what happened. I remember usually at closing time, parents would close the Big Ben around 9. Well, I would always ask my dad if I could drive his 52 Chevy home. And of course I was only 12 or 13. And he said, "As long as you go to the alleyways." And so I'd take the dog and go home and stuff. Well, when I finally turned 16 and got a license, I was so proud. That evening, Buck Snotty come in and he says, "Now you don't have to drive the alleyways."
One of the deals that Buck Snotty had, he would pull up behind you without any lights. And you'd be driving along and nothing, and all of a sudden the red lights are on. Where did he come from?
Any other questions?
Why couldn't you date the boys from Clarkdale?
Were they too wild, or what was the reason? Yeah, they were wild and they listened to that crazy music, you know, the Beatles.
We were all good boys.
Yeah, they're all good boys.
I wanted to hear another, either a Buck Snotty story or a practical joke that you guys must have done with your buds for high school or something that's just, that you don't dare tell us, and now we open the floor, you can tell us, right?
One was that there was another policeman here, I don't remember his first name, but his last name was Hopper.
Yeah.
And he was a lot like Don Knotts, if you ever watched. Who they only gave one bullet. He was so nervous as a patrolman, which I don't know if he'd have made it today or not. But we as kids, when we were 16, 17, 18, we would get in cars, 2 or 3 of us, and we'd race through town and get him chasing one. We'd hide, and then he'd go be looking for us, and we just drove him nuts. The other thing was with him, behind when the swimming pool was here, there was a gentleman and his wife who lived here, and we would sneak over the fence and skinny dip in the pool here.
Who's that, Tom Sherman?
Tom Sherman was here, and then Carl Belts, who later took over.
Yeah.
Well, he would come out and turn on the lights, and we were nude, and he would bring his wife out, and she would read a book for about an hour. Then the water got pretty cold.
We used to spend a lot of time at the Clarkdale Golf Course, the Barbie Valley Country Club. In fact, I have a scorecard up here from that era, and they had, it was probably the only place they had dances, and our parents went to functions there, seemed like every weekend. And a friend of mine and my brother, it was Dan Bright, Dan Bright's oldest son, they asked us if we would wash dishes during their function. Sure. So we spent all the time back in the kitchen area, and when nobody was looking, we would steal a couple beers out of the refrigerators. There was a ditch that watered the golf course in the back, right next to us, so we would drop them in the ditch, and our plan was to come back the next day or whatever. And we didn't know what a cold beer was then. It was beer. So we'd go back eventually and have a beer out of that ditch. They probably knew what we were doing. I imagine they did.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Yes.
I'm from the east, so football was very important to us. And did they ever have a football stadium here?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
End of Clarkdale,
where the school is.
where the elementary school is, above the elementary school, that was the football field. We all played football on that when we were in high school. Anyway, I did, I don't know. You guys still played there, didn't you?
Until my freshman year of high school, that's where we played football.
What?
Until my freshman year of high school. Your daughter's freshman year of high school was the last year that Mingus played football there.
Okay, but it was it had grandstands on both sides.
Did you have parades here?
Homecoming.
I have some old newspapers here that show a parade and us riding donkeys and our Clarkdale and our Clarkdale baseball team, Steve and me and Dan Bright.
I played for the Cardinals.
You did? We were always White Sox.
But we won 3 years that I played, we won championship. That was before you guys were even old enough to play.
Yeah. We're a lot younger.
Some of the things that we've talked about up here today, it strikes me as kind of funny, is because we all had such a great time living in Clarkdale and everything growing up. But the truth of the matter is most of the things we did, you get thrown in jail for now.
I have to say one other thing. The Big Ben had the best French fries in all of Verde Valley.
It's now encased in Sukasa. There is no building there now. Sukasa built completely around it.
Okay, we'll take one more question, I think, from the...
Big Ben was up here, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're
Okay,
Sukasa.
that's what I thought.
Yeah.
What was the one down here?
It was Effie's and then later,
Effie's, that
and
was
then
the
later
one you
called
sold
Why
the
Not?
ice cream.
When Don Downs had it, he used to deliver the papers. He changed the name to Why Not Drive In.
Right.
That was after I left. He delivered papers to me though. Uptown in Clarkdale, I had a paper route.
So what about the title, Don't Date the Clarkdale Boys? Anybody interpret that for me? That's the name of this thing, right?
Those Clarkdale Boys, well, from the stories that you've just heard from them about what they did as boys and as young men, then that was part of the reputation of why we couldn't name the Clarkdale Boys. They're hiding beer and drinking and setting places on fire, driving when they were 14. At that time, that wasn't out of the ordinary, but that was the perception of our folks at that time. So.
And we never did any of that.
No. Oh, no. Us girls, we never participated in that. I had my fingers crossed because I know lightning's in the street. The boys have brought some pictures and some memorabilia and a lot of their high school annuals. If any of you are interested in looking at that or asking them any more questions, then Michael, are we okay? We got a couple minutes to do that?
Yes.
Okay. So we will wrap it up and be here to chat with you for a few minutes if you like. Thank you for having us.
Thank you everybody for coming today. We hope to have at least 2 more of these events before the summer, so watch Facebook and the Verde Independent. It's always going to be on the first Friday of the month. And like Barbie said, we have plenty of time. Take your time to go take a look at the memorabilia up there, ask questions, and enjoy just being together. Thank you. We also have some information in the back of the room. There's some pamphlets about Clarkdale, our museum. Feel free to take those, some postcards, direct you to our website. We also have all of the Mingus Union, Jerome, Clarkdale yearbooks on our website, so feel free to look at those. And finally, we have a donation box back there. If you feel that you enjoyed the event, we appreciate.
Turn that off now. I don't want to bend over that table up there if you're taking pictures.